Download this code from codegive.com, link in the description below. Creating a full stack application using Spring Boot 3 for the backend and Angular for the frontend involves several steps. This tutorial will guide you through building a simple API with Spring Boot and consuming it with an Angular application. We'll create a basic application that manages a list of tasks. Prerequisites: 1. Java JDK, version 17 or later. 2. Maven, for building the Spring Boot application. 3. Node.js and npm, for building the Angular application. 4. Angular CLI, install it globally via npm install g at angular/cli. 5. An IDE, like IntelliJ IDEA, Eclipse, or Visual Studio Code. Step 1. Create the Spring Boot API. 1.1 Set up the project. You can use Spring initializr to bootstrap your Spring Boot application. 1. Go to Spring initializr, https://start.spring.io. 2. Choose the following options. Project, Maven project. Language, Java. Spring Boot, 3.x.x. Group, COM example. Artifact, Task Manager. Dependencies, Spring Web, Spring Data JPA, H2 database, for simplicity. 3. Click Generate to download the project. Unzip it and open it in your IDE. 1.2 Create the model. Create a new Java class named Task in the model package. Java. Package COM example.taskmanager.model. Import jakarta.persistence.entity. Import jakarta.persistence.generated-value. Import jakarta.persistence.generation-type. Import jakarta.persistence.id. At entity. Public class task. At ID. At generated-value, strategy equals generation-type.identity. Private long ID. Private string title. Private boolean completed. / getters and setters. Public long get ID. Return ID. Public void set ID, long ID. This .id equals ID. Public string get title. Return title. Public void set title, string title. This .title equals title. Public boolean is completed. Return completed. Public void set completed, boolean completed. This .completed equals completed. 1.3 Create the repository. Create a repository interface. Task repository. Java. Package COM example.taskmanager.repository. Import COM example.taskmanager.model.task. Import org.springframework.data.jpa.repository.jpa repository. Public interface task repository extends JPA repository task, long. 1.4 Create the controller. Create a REST controller. Task controller. Java. Package COM example.taskmanager.controller. Import COM example.taskmanager.model.task. Import COM example.taskmanager.repository.task repository. Import org.springframework.beans.factory.annotation.autowired. Import org.springframework.http.http status. Import org.springframework.http.response entity. Import org.springframework.web.bind.annotation *. Import java.utility list. At REST controller. At request mapping, /API/tasks. Public class task controller. At auto wired. Private task repository. Task repository. At get mapping. Public list task get all tasks. Return task repository.findAll. Add post mapping. Public response entity task create task, add request body task task. Task saved task equals task repository.save, task. Return new response entity, saved task, http status.created. Add put mapping, /id. Public response entity task update task, add path variable long id, add request body task task details. Task equals task repository.find by id, id, or else throw. Task.set title, task details.get title. Task.set completed, task details.is completed. Task updated task equals task repository.save, task. Return response entity.ok, updated task. At delete mapping, /id. Public response entity void delete task, at path variable long id. Task repository.delete by id, id. Return response entity.no content.build. 1.5 Configure application properties. In src/main/resources/application.properties, configure the H2 database. Properties. Spring.h2.console.enabled equals true. Spring.datasource.url equals jdbch2 test. Spring.datasource.driver class name equals org.h2.driver. Spring.datasource.username equals sa. Spring.datasource.password equals. Spring.jpa.hibernate.ddl auto equals update. 1.6 Run the application. Run your Spring Boot application. You can access the H2 console at http://localhost 8080/h2 console. Step 2. Create the Angular application. 2.1 Set up the Angular project. Create a new Angular project. Bash. ng new task manager routing equals true style equals css. cd task manager. npm install at angular/material at angular/cdk. 2.2 Create a service to interact with the API. Generate a service for handling API requests. Bash. ng generate services/task. In src/app/services/task.service.ts, implement the service. TypeScript. Import injectable from at angular/core. Import HTTP client from at angular/common/http. Import observable from rxjs. Import task from /model/task. Add injectable. Provided in root. Export class task service. Private API URL equals http://localhost 8080/API/tasks. Constructor, private HTTP client. Get asks, observable task. Return this.http.getTask, this.api URL. Create task, task observable task. Return this.http.postTask, this.api URL, task. Update task, task observable task. Return this.http.putTask, $this.api URL /$task.id, task. Delete task, id, number observable void. Return this.http.delete void, $this.api URL /$id. 2.3 Create a model for task. Create a model for task in src/app/model/task.ts. TypeScript. Export interface task. ID, number. Title, string. Completed, Boolean. 2.4 Create the task component. Generate a component to display tasks. Bash. ng generate component/task. In src/app/components/task/task.component.ts, implement the component. TypeScript. Import component, on init from @angular/core. Import task service from //services/task.service. Import task from //model/task. Add component. Selector, app task. Template URL, ./task.component.html. Style URLs, ./task.component.css. Export class task component implements on init. Tasks, task equals. New task, task equals title, completed, false. Constructor, private task service, task service. Gone init, void. This.load tasks. Load tasks. This.task service.get asks, .subscribe, tasks equals. This.tasks equals tasks. Add task. This.task service.create task, this.new task, .subscribe, task equals. This.tasks.push, task. This.new task equals title, completed, false, / clear input. Update task, task, task. This.task service.update task, task, .subscribe. Delete task, ID, number. This.task service.delete task, ID, .subscribe, equals. This.tasks equals this.tasks.filter, task equals task.id, equals ID. 2.5 Create HTML template. In src/app/components/task/task.component.html, create a simple template. HTML. Div. H2 Task Manager /H2. Input, ng model, equals new task.title placeholder equals task title / button, click, equals add task /button. ul. li *ng for equals let task of tasks. Input type equals checkbox, ng model, equals task.completed, change, equals update task, task, / task.title. Button, click, equals delete task, task.id, delete /button. /li. /ul. /div. 2.6 Update app module. In src/app/appmodule.ts, import necessary modules. TypeScript. Import browser module from @angular/platform browser. Import ng module from @angular/core. Import HTTP client module from @angular/commons/http. Import forms module from @angular/forms. Import app component from ./app component. Import task component from ./components/task/task.component. At ng module. Declarations. App component. Task component. Imports. Browser module. HTTP client module. Forms module. Providers. Bootstrap, app component. Export class app module. 2.7 Include the task component in app component. In src/app/appcomponent.html, include the task component. HTML. App task/app task. Step 3, run the Angular application. Run the Angular application. Bash. ng serve. Now go to http://localhost 4200 to see your Task Manager application in action. Conclusion: you have successfully created a full-stack application using Spring Boot 3 for the backend and Angular for the frontend. This basic task manager demonstrates how to create, read, update, and delete tasks through a RESTful API and a simple Angular interface. Next steps: implement authentication, example JWT. Use a more robust database, example PostgreSQL. Add error handling in both the backend and frontend. Enhance the user interface using Angular Material or Bootstrap. Feel free to expand on this example as needed.